we're at a feed yard today. So what is a feed yard? When we talk about, when you see that feed lot or feed yard, what is a feed yard?
You know, the business of a feed yard is kind of like owning a hotel and a restaurant. A hotel that has a restaurant in it makes money by having people in their rooms and dining in their dining facilities. A feed yard's kind of the same way. You have pens, which are rooms, and your dining facility is the feed mill that's providing feed that's delivered to each one of those pens. And so, you know, that's kind of the parallel there. And so the way a feed yard makes its money is having cattle in the pens and delivering feed from the feed mill. And in a feed yard, there's two profit centers in a feed yard, if you want to think about it that way. One of the profit centers is, you can call it operations. And operations is the feed mill back here. Bringing in feed, formulating feed, manufacturing feed, delivering feed, and the money and profit that's generated from that operation. Then the other profit center would be the cattle that are on feed. You take a feed yard such as this, there will be a consulting veterinarian that is on retainer with the feed yard, and that veterinarian is the professional responsible for overseeing the health management of the cattle inside this feed yard. So that consulting veterinarian works with the employees of this feed yard to train them to better be able to diagnose and recognize disease issues. And then that veterinarian also provides training to those employees on how to treat the animals that may have a health issue. And so that there's training that the consulting veterinarian provides to the employees to make them more competent to deal with health issues that are encountered in the feed yard. The consulting veterinarian also is the professional that is responsible for providing the treatment protocols for the animals. So once an animal is identified that has a health problem, here is the veterinary medical protocol that you will follow to deal with that health issue in that animal. And so that consulting veterinarian manages the health programs from personnel training to protocols for treating those animals. The other professional that's key at the feed yard from a consulting standpoint would be the nutritionist. And the feed yards will have a consulting nutritionist, and that nutritionist again is responsible for helping design the feeding programs, giving the feed resources available to provide the most efficient growth and production of those animals, and also is involved in health maintenance, because nutrition and health are related to one another. And so the consulting nutritionist is the one that, as you said, who makes up the menu, works with the feed yard management to develop formulate the rations and the different rations and when they'll be fed to the animals during the time that they're in the feed yard. The nutritionist is helping formulate rations, but really the nutritionist is a key portion of that is also quality control. They're working in the feed mill to look at feed quality, looking at proper mixing procedures to make sure the feeds are mixed properly and in the right proportions. They also deal with what's called bunk management. So again, in the case of a restaurant, how's the food presented on the table, but bunk management on how you manage the delivery of the feed and the timing of the deliveries. And then over time, as cattle grow, their feed consumption changes. So how do you manage those feed consumption patterns by the animals to maintain their health and maintain their performance? And again, they work with training. The nutritionist works with the people in the feed mill. They work with the individuals that are driving the trucks and delivering the feed to the pens to ensure that all that works according to the way that they want the system to work.
So we saw a truck delivering some feed here. So what inside that truck, is there some sort of computerized system that helps them tell them what to do or how much to feed?
The general process is in the morning early, before the sun comes up generally. There'll be an individual that's called a feed caller or feed manager, and they will make a round through the complete feedlot looking in the bunks at the different pens to see if there's any feed remaining in the bunks and so forth. And they'll look at that, and they'll also look at the previous day's feed that was delivered to those pens, and then they make the call on what the day's feed will be for that pen. So that's all entered into a computer. And so, for instance, pen here, pen 12, they've got a history of the feed deliveries on this pen, and they're deciding, well, do we need to increase the feed today or leave it where it was, or maybe it looks like there was some feed left in the bunk, so we need to deliver less today because they left some in the bunk. So that process goes on in terms of monitoring, and they make the call on the feed deliveries. So then they'll go back and they sit down at the computer and they enter all those calls for the different feeds into the computer. And we'll get into rations in a minute, but there's different rations that they're feed. But they'll make that call, that's entered into the computer. Then that goes into the main system, and they begin batching feed. They'll know for ration number 14 or whatever the ration is, we need so many pounds total today. So that goes into the batching system where they begin batching the feed, mixing the feed, and manufacturing it for the day. Then the feed truck driver that you mentioned a moment ago, then they have a computer in the truck, and that computer then pulls up each one of those pens of cattle that they're delivering feed to and says you need to deliver this many pounds of feed into the bunk. And so that's on there.
There's a scale on the truck?
There's a scale on the truck that weighs all that out. So that's all computerized, so that delivers, and it records in the computer in the truck what was delivered to that pen, and that then is relayed back to the main system on what was delivered to the pen.
So you talked about the animal health side, so when they do treat an animal, that's also entered in the computer as well.
Right.
So what do they do with that information?
Well, for instance, if you walked over into this hospital barn right here, and you walk in, each one of these animals, if we happen to look at one of these tags out here, you can see that they've got a tag, and in this case, there's a large number at the bottom of the tag. That's called the lot tag. And what that basically tells you is what room at the hotel they belong in. So this is lot number 6250 here if we looked at it, and it shows that lot 6250 is in pen P12. So that's a lot tag, and that's also keeps those as an ownership group for tracking purposes. But also, if you look in the top of that tag, you'll see a number up in the very top of that tag. That's an individual number, so we may not be able to see it, but if we look at the steer right back here, he's number 234. That's his individual number. So if he becomes ill or has a health problem and has to be moved into the hospital for treatment, that's number 234 from lot 6250. That there's a computer in here, and that's entered. And then there will be an entry for what medications or what treatments were applied to that animal on what day. And that's all computerized and kept in the system, so they can track that animal in terms of success or lack of success of the treatment. And then ultimately, when these animals are ready to go to processing, those records are checked to make sure that every animal in one of these lots has cleared the period of time that we call the withdrawal time. So if they've had some type of treatment for their health issues, that they have cleared the withdrawals and they will be safe and not be carrying any residues as they go into the processing stage. You asked about the menu earlier. When cattle come into a feed yard such as this, they do not begin directly on the highest grain ration that's fed. They go through a step-up process, what's called a step-up process. And you start, because we talked about the rumen earlier in the microbial populations. Well, inside the rumen, as we go from a high roughage diet, like they may have been consuming out when they were grazing, and we move to a higher grain or higher concentrate diet, the population of microbes in the rumen changes.
And that takes some time?
It takes some time, and if we don't allow an adaptation time for that to occur, we can create some health problems. And you know, you'll hear people talk about, well, cattle shouldn't be fed grain, they're supposed to be out grazing, okay? Well, the way I look at it is when the Creator created cattle, inside their rumen, they have in that microbial population, there are already microbes in there that will use starch, just like there are microbes that will use forage. It's not like those microbes are absent. They are always there. So they have the ability to utilize starch. It's just what has to occur over time is we've got to allow time for that shift to occur and let that microbial population adjust. And so when they're out on grass, on grazing, you know, their microbial population may be dominated by the microbes that preferentially use cellulose, but those starch digesters are always in there. They're just a smaller proportion of the population. As we shift to the corn-based diet, such as we see here, those starch fermenters begin to increase, and the cellulose fermenters, they don't completely disappear, but their proportion in the community declines. And we've got to let that transition occur, because the fermentation processes occur, and if we do that too rapidly, we can create some health issues in the cattle. So once again, that's part of the whole nutritional management program, is being able to start the cattle and transition them safely onto these programs where they then can complete the finishing phase without health issues.